I am here with the one and only Emma and Finn. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with you guys, can you just share who you are and what the Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast is?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having us. First of all, we're really excited to be here. And
thank you for letting us be anonymous. We appreciate the privacy. So thank you to Leah and to the listeners for letting us do that. We appreciate it.
Yes, very much so. So we are in our mid-30s, early 30s. We live in Southern California. We've been exploring non-monogamy for about 10 years, and we have been together about 15 years, and we started the podcast about 2.5 years ago. So it's been a journey.
And the podcast is weekly interviews with people who are exploring non-monogamy in various ways. So we talk to people pretty much across the entire spectrum of swinging, polyamory, monogamish, all sorts of different dynamics and gender identities and sexual identities and everything. So it's been amazing and exciting. So we're excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
One of the things that has been really interesting for me to discover in my own exploration with non-monogamy is how incredibly different the types are. Can you share a little bit about the most common types of non-monogamy that you come across?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of times people divide sort of into two camps, and it's usually a broad generalization of the polyamorous and the swingers. And the two, so again, these are sort of broad definitions, because one of the things that we've really learned, and we kind of already knew this, but one of the things that's really been cemented for us over the last 2 years is that these definitions are really fluid, and the line between them is very blurry. So you see people who are swingers who also have poly partners, and you'll see poly people who have who go to swing clubs with different partners. So in general,
backing up a little bit. So in general, swinging is usually, I hate using these definitions because they mean so many different things. But in general, it's more looking for a sexual connection. And that's why a lot of people go to swing clubs looking for people to hook up with. Now there's many variations of that. And then polyamory is a lot of times more relationships with other people. It's
looking for something deeper.
Right. Exactly.
So those are like very surface level definitions, but that's roughly how people tend to divide up.
And how would you define monogamish?
Yeah, so that's a fun one. It's a lot of, there's people who they dabble in non-monogamy maybe like once or twice a year. Maybe they just go on vacation, or they're basically, everybody looking in from the outside would think they're monogamous, and pretty much they are, but maybe once in a while there's a hall pass, or they go on a vacation, or somebody has like one, like it's sort of like that's sporadic. And again, everybody sort of defines it themselves, but that's, I guess, kind of the general broad.
The term was coined by Dan Savage, though.
That's right. Who's the common co-presenter with Esther. They've done probably at least a dozen interviews together. They're often paired. I think they're buddies. One of the things that's so fascinating to me is I literally have zero interest in swinging. Like, it could not be less appealing to me. Less appealing. Does that make sense? Or less unappealing?
We got you.
But what's interesting to me is oftentimes couples will start out in swinging, and they make kind of an agreement that they're not going to have an emotional connection or develop feelings. And then feelings will develop, and then they'll transition to poly. Do you find that there's generally like one camp or the other, like someone that's really drawn to swinging but not poly, or someone that's really drawn to poly but not swinging? Or do you find it more often that there's a lot of fluidity and kind of evolution in the form of the non-monogamy?
Yeah, I would say it's typically, and again, just disclaimers, these are like broad generalizations, right? So you'll sometimes hear the swinger community being like, well, we don't want feelings, we just want this to be a physical thing. And again, this isn't everybody. And then there are sometimes in the poly community where people will be like, well, sort of they use like the dirty swingers, right? Like we want feelings, we want emotions, we want a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about sex for us. And well, when you sort of dive into it, you sort of see lots of, again, blurring of these lines where somebody maybe identifies as polyamorous, but maybe they go on multiple dates in a week and hook up with a couple different people, right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
in practice, the sort of the type of sex you're having is not much different than what somebody
Right.
who's swinging would be having.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of maybe a one night stand, or maybe it's friends with benefits or something like that. So yeah, it's interesting. I think people feel safe when they can label something, and
Interesting.
yeah,
I can see that.
Yeah.
Can you share what type of non-monogamy you practice now or have practiced in the past, if there's been an evolution?
Yeah, it's definitely been an evolution.
It's been a journey. So when we first started, we were pretty young. We were in our early 20s, and we wanted to make friends and meet people and develop friendships, like kind of friends with benefits. That's what we've always been looking for. From the outside looking in, our dynamic has definitely looked more like swinging than anything else. But that has evolved. We've always been looking for friends with benefits, for sure. Like that's been our kind of common ground throughout our whole experience. But
it's hard to find.
It is hard to find. And non-monogamy
why so? What makes it challenging?
Well, so a couple of things. One, it's right, like, first of all, meeting friends as an adult is not always easy. And then there's two of us and potentially two of them. And then so all four of us have to like each other, which is not easy to do.
Ideally the exact same amount.
Yes, exactly. And then you pile on top of that, then not only do you have to like each other, but if you're looking to do a friends with benefits, there probably has to be some type of physical or sexual interest. And then again, ideally, that's a four-way thing, right? And I think when people get into this, they start to realize that those are really difficult dynamics to find. And and so you see people, they start to like bend away from that, and they're like, well, we're okay meeting solo partners, or we're okay if it's not a four-way connection. You can go, or I can go, and so we've
that
met,
kind of happened for us.
It did, and we've also sort of met a lot of people who we've become really, really good friends with, and maybe the sexual side of it didn't stick around, but the really good friends, or maybe we can sit around and talk about things that we can't talk about with other people, but it's just like a really deep friendship.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about just how hard a relationship between two people is, it's like magnified as soon as you add a third or a fourth. I remember listening to one of your podcast episodes. I can't remember. It was definitely a Southern California couple, probably a little bit of a younger couple, maybe late 20s. They were talking about a really challenging dynamic that started out with, it was like them as a couple and their friends who were a couple, and they thought everything was great, but one of the partners was like getting really jealous and kind of like putting restrictions on the guy, and that made the other woman think like he wasn't into it. And there were a lot of dynamics at play.
Yeah, it was an episode with, it was Claire and Phil. I don't remember the number. I want to say it was somewhere around the hundreds.
Yeah.
Just
you have 154 now, which is amazing.
Yeah. So no, that's true. Yeah. You think everything is great, and then something happens and you're like, well, I don't know who it was. It me? Was it Emma? Was it them? We don't know. Right. And so, it's a really interesting place to be.
The whole thing takes, honestly, just so much communication in all directions. And that's the main thing that obviously we've learned over the years and from talking to many people too, like it takes communication, a really, really good communication and vulnerable communication. So for us, like as Finn has kind of evolved into, at first we were kind of meeting couples only, and it kind of, we've done some solo stuff since then and separate stuff. And we reached the point maybe a few years ago where we were kind of just open to whatever happened. And
so there's really nothing that's off limits at this point. It's just what feels right, and we communicate about it, and we communicate that to other people.
Yeah, it is such an evolution. And that's kind of what I've witnessed as I've been navigating this is, the couples that have been doing it for a decade are in generally such a different place than the couples that are in like the first 6 months or even like the first year or two.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. But I mean, I will say there was one, I don't remember who we heard about these people from. Somebody was telling us that one of their friends, they got into swinging, but they started only doing separate stuff because they didn't think they were ready to actually see the other person. So for like the first year or two of their exploration of this, they were only doing separate play because they didn't feel they had graduated to being together yet. So as they sort of went into it backwards. So again, everybody just does it their own way. And there's no
that's
wrong.
so funny because I feel like the more common entry point would be the opposite, would be we're going to do everything together and we're always going to be with each other, and nothing will happen without me being there or without you being there, and that will keep it safe. And I feel like that's like kind of one protective strategy, and then the other is like, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to see it, you do you, I'll do me. So it's so funny kind of like the different approaches that people take.
Yeah, no, exactly, for sure. Also, were you able to get confirmation that people can hear us? I don't know if
I haven't gotten confirmation. Hopefully we'll just go off faith right now.
All right. Well, hopefully people can.
Yeah, guys, if anyone who's watching is able to throw a quick note in the comments and let us know if you can hear us okay, that would be wonderful. Just give us a nod. We'll keep going. I'm curious if you can share about a challenge that you two experienced in your relationship while exploring non-monogamy and how you navigated through it.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot over the years.
I think we kind of already touched on one is like finding that four-way connection and finding people. Good, people can hear us. Finding that four-way connection and finding people that are looking for the same thing we are. Another one that we've struggled with personally is that we have kind of approached non-monogamy differently in the fact that when I have trouble kind of figuring out exactly what I want without getting to know the other people a little bit more, and Finn kind of needs me sometimes to like say, is this a yes or a no, at least to have the conversation, like to move forward. It doesn't have to be like, yes, you're saying everything, but we've been working on that and it's gotten much, much better.
Yeah.
Wait, I don't know if I exactly followed. So
So let me try again. Basically, like, let's say you see somebody online that you're interested in, and I would say, well, these seem like great people. Are you interested? And it's always, I don't know, right? Do you want to go to this event? I don't know. And it's a lot of like indecision versus like when you're saying, are you interested in talking to these people? Or maybe we're at an event. Hey, those seem like nice people. Do you want to talk to them? Well, I don't know. Well, I'm not saying, do you want to like go marry them and then run off to the bedroom or anything? Like, I'm just saying, do they seem like on the surface you would want to have a conversation?
And I think it comes from me being a shy person and not like having trouble putting myself out there. That's where it comes from.
Okay, got it. That's really helpful. That's interesting. That was kind of the dynamic of the couple that I shared about in my episode on the Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast. I think that the woman had a lot of that kind of like, well, I don't quite know. And I'm like a very decisive person and I'm pretty self-aware. And so generally, like if I like sense a connection and I'm interested, I want to go like 100 miles an hour, So even just like the pacing in non-monogamy can be, you can bump up against like pacing differences.
Exactly. Yeah,
for sure.
And it's something that I've worked a lot on just myself in general and our communication too. And I think it's gotten much better.
Yeah, I would also say like early on, this was definitely one of our biggest problems was we were way too patient with other people. And we were also, we kind of approached things with, I think a lot of people do this when they first start, they think that this like can't really be happening, right? So I can't believe we're actually going to go to a club and maybe meet other people or go on a date with another couple. And so you tend to try to force things because you're like, well, this might be the only chance we ever get because this is so crazy. And oftentimes then you power through situations that you maybe should have
evacuated.
Gotten out of. And then what consequently can happen is that winds up being your only opportunity because it didn't turn out like people wanted and it was a bad experience and now you don't do it again. So it's a weird it's a weird thing. And so like I don't know, maybe we're gluttons for punishment, but we powered through a lot of those situations.
Early on, we made a lot of mistakes. Yeah.
And we've gotten to a point now where like it's much easier for us to be like, yeah, no, this isn't going to be a good fit. Thanks for your time. Thanks for chatting or whatever. Mm-hmm. And we're much better at extracting ourselves from those situations.
Yeah. I actually think, now that you mentioned that, I think that also might have happened with the couple that I described in the episode I did with you. I think it was episode 146, if I remember correctly.
That sounds right.
But I think that the woman needed to take things very, very slowly to feel secure. And I think because of the way the connection developed between me and the guy, which was like really intense, really fast, I think that was like really uncomfortable and scary for her. And I almost wonder if it might have kind of like put the pause on something that I think that they were, both kind of, they obviously were both open to doing it, or else, we wouldn't have been there. We wouldn't have met up in the first place. So it just that's such a good point. It's like, you really need to start from a foundation of like being self-aware, being able to express your boundaries or even know what your boundaries are, feel comfortable saying no versus like people pleasing. All of these like relational skills that if aren't in place, you might embark on situations that make you just kind of turned off to it.
Yeah. And at the end of the day too, though, like we're all going to make mistakes, and like we made a whole bunch of them and we're still here. Right. So like
you learn
and you, I don't know, we look back on them and we laugh at them, and
you have to give yourself some grace to make those mistakes, because we're all human and they're going to happen. And I think the bottom line is try to be gentle with yourself and with other people.
Yeah. What were some of the mistakes that you made?
I think the biggest, it was like, people would get way too drunk and we would stick around in a situation that was really uncomfortable for us.
Yeah.
Thinking like, oh, well, we don't know how to leave. It was awkward. And it just, stuff kind of just goes off the rails.
Yeah. Like forcing situations. That was my biggest mistake.
Wow.
And that would exactly what you just said.
That's really interesting. I don't drink, so I guess the alcohol thing. I mean, obviously the other people can be drunk and that can complicate it, but with me being sober, it does make it easier for sure.
Yeah, and I will say there was only really one of these situations where one of us was the person who drank too much, and in that situation we actually left on time. But the other ones were typically somebody else drinking too much, and it just not going well.
Yeah, we're not huge drinkers anyway. Yeah. So it was a lot of early learning in those situations of when someone is too drunk or just not in good space, it's time to call it a night.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious if you guys have any like pro vetting tips. So like things that you've picked up over the past decade, types of like questions that you like to cover early on, or things that you look for that would be like green light, red light.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we like to bring up obviously get to know the person a little bit, general questions, but then we bring up safety pretty quickly. Yeah. So we, especially with COVID, like that's a whole nother conversation now. So if someone's like is not even wanting to talk about the fact that COVID is a thing, and how to proceed and what they're doing and all of this stuff, then that's a huge red flag now. But also just talking about STI status, sexual health, what you're interested in, all of those types of things. What dynamic are you looking for?
Mm-hmm.
I think too, if you're chatting with somebody, like trying to be, and maybe if it's another couple, right, getting into a group chat with all four people and making sure that all four people are engaged, and that you kind of gives you the vibe that everybody wants to be there. And maybe if that's not working well, like schedule a short like video chat with them so you can kind of get the feel for that. Or if it works out, like go do something that's like maybe has like a time limit, like grab a coffee, grab a drink or something, where you're not setting yourself up for like 5 hours of having to be there, but maybe it's an hour. Like, hey, we got to go do something. you can go meet, get to know them, make sure they're who they say they are and that they're both interested.
Yeah.
And
We've had friends that'll do lunch dates. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of a commit, not a long commitment, but just like going to meet that person, like Finn said, for coffee or even just to go for a walk in the park. That is really helpful to before making any further, I guess, commitments.
Yeah. You brought up COVID and just talking about sexual health. And what's so interesting to me in this moment is it's really brought up the topic in couples of risk and like appetite for risk or risk tolerance in a whole new level. I obviously, like, it can surface with talking about sexual health and what's okay and what's not okay, but bring in COVID and that's like a whole nother layer. And there are some couples where like they didn't really think about the difference in risk tolerance, and this moment, especially if you're polyamorous, has really like shone a light on it, and even has like split up couples because they've seen that their risk tolerance is just so different.
Yeah. No, that's really hard, right? If you, for us, it hasn't been a big, well, it's been, obviously COVID's been a big deal, but like in terms of like other partners, like we didn't have like any long-term partners. And I can, we have talked to people where they've had to stop seeing somebody because, maybe it's not even that their risk, well, I guess it is, their risk tolerance is different, but maybe that person lives with an elderly parent and they're like, I know you guys are being careful, but like I don't have, like, my risk tolerance is like 0, even if you are still a very safe, conscientious person about it. And so it's really, and it's one of those, I don't know why this analogy popped into my brain a few weeks ago, but with COVID, right? Like you could hang out with somebody and then easily give COVID to your grandparents, right? You're probably not going to give an STI to your grandparents if you picked one up, swinging or in a polyamorous dynamic. So like you can be as careful as you want, but there's just, it is what it is.
Yeah, that's a great point actually too. Yeah, the ripple effect. So I'm curious, what have you seen as the greatest benefit of non-monogamy for your relationship?
It's hard to choose one.
Or you can share a couple.
Yeah.
You go first, then I'll go. Maybe I should go first.
No, a huge benefit has been the fact we've always been able to talk about a lot of things. Having non-monogamy be part of our lives allows us to talk about way more than we probably would have otherwise. We opened up our relationship fairly early on in dating, so it's kind of always been there, but the level and different situations has allowed us to have lots of different conversations, and that have been really important. It's also brought a lot of fun into our relationship, and that has been really important because it allows us both to, I guess, give ourselves permission to have fun, right? Like when you're kind of in the middle of life and you're worried about these different things and working really hard, and it's just take a step back and do something like this together brings a lot of that joy.
Yeah. Do you feel almost like that you get the best of both worlds in terms of like the safety and security of a long-term relationship with like the energy and the passion of a new relationship or a new connection?
Yeah, I think so.
I also think too, like, and I know this is like, I don't want this to come off as dark, but like we've met people who, they'd been in a marriage for however, 10, 20 years, and then something happened. They meet somebody somewhere along the way and they wind up splitting up, right? And so like yes, we feel very secure right now, but like you never know how secure it is, and like you're always testing things, but at the same time,
that could happen whether you're non-monogamous or not.
That could happen if you walk into the grocery store and all of a sudden you meet the love of your life, whether or not you're allowed to or not, right? And so it's a very strange place. But I think what Emma said earlier is like the fact that we can talk about it makes it a huge difference, and we don't have to hide it from each other. If you do meet that person, or you meet somebody who you're interested in, or there's a spark, like we can talk about it, and then we can decide how do we want to pursue that. And so there's really nothing that we can't talk about. And I think that's allowed us to do things in our life beyond just the sexual stuff that we normally, that we may not have been able to do because we weren't afraid to ask difficult questions and have difficult conversations.
Yeah. I also see it as a really helpful release valve for a relationship. So instead of needing one person to fulfill everything for you, it's funny because I often have like offline conversations with group members. And, there might be one in particular comes to mind, a guy who was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And so, because of that, his ability to be sexual is just very different than hers. And the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that comes up for him in sex and what he's comfortable with and what he's not because of the trauma, etc. And they have a wonderful relationship. And so she's become poly and he's stayed monogamous. And, he talks regularly about how great it's been for their relationship in terms of like taking the pressure off him to do things that are like still kind of traumatic for him, but she feels satisfied and they have, this relationship that they both really value. It's just really interesting to hear how people use it as a tool to actually enhance their primary relationship.
Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, obviously not what happened to him, but that they found a way to make
make it
that work. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's similar. We interviewed a couple. Well, we interviewed the wife of this couple, who after 33 years of marriage, her husband finally came out to her as gay, and they stayed together, and they both now they're married, and
They don't have sex with each other, but they have sex with other people, but they keep their relationship the way they want it to be.
Yeah. So people make it work.
Yeah, we have a group member whose husband is transitioning and, kind of like they're not necessarily open yet, but it's like these things can come up in a long-term relationship. And, there are so many things that people can get out of a relationship. And I feel like monogamy has made us think that we need like all the things from one relationship. And to me, that's one of the beauties of polyamory is I feel like I can just accept people for who they are and what their gifts are and what their strengths are versus like needing them to be something else or something different because that's important for me in a relationship.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. Yeah.
I wanted to share a quote that I really like from Dossie Easton, who's the author of The Ethical Slut, which is kind of, I think there are like 3 core polyamory books, More Than Two, Ethical Slut, and Opening Up. And I just love this quote, and I wanted to get your perspective on it. So
Sure.
she writes, actually, this isn't from the book. This is from an interview that I was listening to with her. So she says, "We have been taught to find polyamory frightening. We need to start being curious about our feelings, where our emotions come from, and why we are feeling them. We were raised to believe that the feelings that are aroused if our partner has sex with or is interested in someone else are intolerable and beyond our ability to control. Often the response is then to slam on the brakes, but avoiding feelings and conversations that we think will hurt us actually blocks our healing and our growth. They're also generally the conversations that deepen our relationships and bring us closer to our partners." Curious if that like resonates or if you've seen that in the 154 conversations you've had.
It definitely resonates. It's very true. Because in certain situations, your gut might be sometimes to stop or to shut things down when of course you don't want anyone to be hurt. You don't want to be hurt, but if you're willing to take that next step and be brave to be a little bit uncomfortable, then I think you're allowing yourself and your relationship to grow in ways that that are amazing.
I think it's also too that I think there's this the belief, right, that if I love Emma and then if I was to start loving somebody else, that some of my love for Emma has to be like given to this other person, that you're not able to like love one person and then also love another person without having to like detract from your love for the first person. And so that's a very scary thing. Like, it's scary to even be the person falling in love, right? Like, falling in love with 2 people. I've never had this before. And then you have to think about like, now I have to try to communicate this to my partner that I love somebody else. And but I don't love them any less. So
Right.
and then if they're telling you this, you're like, well, now like they must love me less. How could they love me and this other person? Especially, this is something else that's interesting we've talked about, is like there's sort of two camps. There's, I'm attracted to somebody who's exactly like my partner.
Right. Yeah.
Or I'm attracted to somebody who's maybe the opposite of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those bring up insecurities in people that are like, it's almost like a lose-lose, right? Like, well, if you like that person, how could you possibly like me?
Yeah.
That person's just like me. You must love them as much or more than me, because maybe they're just like me, but just a little bit better. And so it's a very difficult but exciting and fun thing to explore.
Yeah. Have you guys ever struggled with, we talk often about this idea of new relationship energy, which are like the butterflies and just kind of this almost like addictive quality when you meet someone new that you really connect with. Have you guys ever struggled with the entrance of new relationship energy into your dynamic when either of you has been with a new partner, and how have you navigated that?
I'd say for me personally, that kind of came up in one situation specifically that I can think of, where what was triggering my insecurities over that was the fact that Finn and I hadn't made time for ourselves in our relationship to connect in ways, and yet he was connecting with someone else in ways that, like, in spending time with someone else that we hadn't made time for.
Yeah.
And that really triggered me, and we had to talk about it. And now that we understand kind of why that was really hard, we can, try to not let that happen again, or at least or if it does, acknowledge that, okay, we need to reset and we need to talk and kind of reprioritize some things in our relationship.
Mm-hmm. It's such a good point, and I just want to build on it. There are a lot of people in the group who really love the work of Thais Gibson. She's kind of, I know attachment theory is like a really big buzzword in the polyamory community, because there's the new book, Polysecure, and it's like all the rage. In the Esther Perel discussion group, we're pretty into attachment theory and dive deep. And there's a woman who, in my opinion, is the most preeminent expert in attachment theory. And she does also a lot of work around understanding personal needs. And what she talks about is oftentimes if our personal needs are met and something happens in our relationship, we might feel it at like a level 1 or 2. But if our personal needs aren't being met and something happens in the relationship, we'll feel it at like a 9 or a 10. And so it can be so critical to like really understand what your personal needs are. So for example, for me, I have a very low personal need for social connection, which would be like those more surface level connections, like going to a bar and just like shooting the shit. I have like a super, super, super deep need for like deep emotional connection and like emotional intimacy and like sharing my inner world and hearing about another's. And so what I find is when that bucket is full for me, then a lot can happen in a relationship and it doesn't really faze me. Curious if that like resonates at all for you guys.
Yeah, the sort of the situation that Emma was describing was we'd been backpacking in South America for like 8 months at this point, maybe 6 months. And we had been in a lot of situations where being intimate together was difficult for many different reasons, but we hadn't prioritized it. It hadn't been happening.
Yeah.
And so that need really for both of us was going unmet. And it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. It was circumstantial and everything. And then we found ourselves in a situation where we sort of were able to relax, and we weren't sort of in these high stress situations, and there was a connection. And there was intimacy happening with another person, but we still hadn't had the time to really come back together and ground ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it was exactly that. There was a need that wasn't being met, and it was really on both of our behalf. And then, having that need met from somebody else was definitely a trigger.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yep.
And I like to bring up that point because oftentimes people think like, oh, you know, if I'm getting triggered or I'm feeling a little jealous, well, we just need to spend more time together. But like, what is truly meaningful for you? Is it like amount of time, or is it a specific type of connection? Or are you doing like an activity you love? You know, I think it's so critical to know yourself and your needs so that you can then communicate them to your partner, because you might be getting, it's not necessarily like the other person in that situation that was triggering you. It was your lack of needs being met. And once you were able to meet those, then like it resolved.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, touching on what you said about the time and the quality of time. So to like clarify, like when we backpacked in South America, we spent 24 hours a day together for 11 months.
Yeah.
So there was no shortage of time being together. And
it's kind of like what everyone's doing with COVID.
Exactly. And you become complacent a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we don't need to have sex tonight. We can do it tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And like a week later, you're like, we need to have sex soon, but not tonight. We're both tired and it's 100% humidity and 95 degrees out. And so you're constantly like making excuses, or you see each other all day long. You're always in each other's business, and that mystery goes away, right? I think we've seen that. We've even in COVID started purposely doing things separately.
Yeah.
We had started going for morning walks, and we walk out the door and we go separate directions.
Yeah.
Because we sit 3 feet from each other all day working. So we don't have any choice in that. So.
Yeah. It's like the exact topic of Esther's first book, Mating in Captivity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. You really need that distance for desire to be there.
For sure.
Yep.
I love it. Okay. So now we have some group member questions for you guys. So the first one, this is a really insightful question. So she asked, do you have any tips on knowing if you desire polyamory or an open relationship because you identify with its values, or because you're dissatisfied in your relationship?
Yeah,
that's a hard one.
That is a hard one. I mean, I think you can chime in a second, but my initial reaction to that question is to really examine the relationship that you're in. And you really need to determine what that relationship is bringing in your life, what value it's bringing, what is important to you, and determine whether it's like, I think it's almost two separate things. Like, is that relationship healthy for you personally? Is it what you want? And maybe that's your interest in non-monogamy or whatever is related to that. But I think it's important to evaluate that relationship itself.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is not going to probably instill any comfort in this person, so I apologize in advance, but I would say like non-monogamy can act very much like a magnifying glass. So if your relationship is doing really well, if you're in a really good place, it can take that and make it way better. If it's not, introducing non-monogamy it doesn't always, but it can really magnify those cracks in the foundation. And so this isn't like, don't try it, but it's, I think, sit down and really think about like, are you really unhappy in your relationship? And I would say if you're sitting here thinking like, well, I'm unhappy, but maybe this will solve it, probably not a great strategy. Like, it's probably not the answer. Now, that's not necessarily true.
We've talked to many people where that's been the case, and that they've opened up their relationship and everything has gotten better.
Yeah.
So I don't have a great like yes or no answer, but I would, it's just having to really dissect that internally and think about what are your motivations. And I mean, it's also like you could try it and see what happens. I mean, it's risky, but you could, I mean, sorry, I don't have a better answer.
I've also found a ton of value in just like listening to a lot of podcasts of people. Obviously, like Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast is an amazing place to start. Some of my other favorites are Multi-Amory, of course, and the Amory podcast, and Making Polyamory Work with Libby Sinback, and Less Than 83, Probably Poly. For me, like the more I listen to the stories and the challenges come up, I feel like it's easier to differentiate, like, is this my truth or is this like trauma or like dissatisfaction that's really driving me? That's
Right.
my approach.
Yeah, and I just maybe just to reiterate, like there are people who have had issues in the relationship and have opened it up, and though like what they needed was that maybe that spark of energy and that nuance, that excitement, and it gave them something to like it reminded them like, hey, we are who, like we were these people and now we can be these people again, like we, you know. So I don't think it's, or there's, you'll hear people oftentimes say like, oh, don't open your relationship to save it, and like yes and no, you know, you kind of have to evaluate for yourself.
It's such a great point. And, you know, Esther talks about that in her second book. Like sometimes an affair can be the death knell of a relationship, and other times it can kind of like be that wake up call that you need to realize like, yeah, like we really do have something here.
Yep. Yeah. We've interviewed a handful of people like that. I mean, we interviewed a couple who their first threesome was with the guy she cheated on him with.
Wow. Wait, which episode was that? Do you remember?
We'll have to look it up real quick.
I'll look it up while we keep
talking. Okay, so next question. This is a slightly different direction. So this is from a female group member who has tried online dating with the intention of being polyamorous, and it wasn't quite working for her. So she said she's willing to try swinging, but like how and where do I begin, and how do I explore it safely as a single woman?
Yeah, so that's a really fantastic question. And it part of like, as far as meeting people goes, it really depends on where you live. There's different apps and different websites that you can use, and you'll have to try out different ones to see what ones are most popular in your area.
Mm-hmm. Can you overview like main regions or main areas and the apps that work best?
Yeah. Sure. So for swinging, so I would say one that we've been exploring and that we've started using that has really worked well is it's Field, and it's FEELD. Mm-hmm. And so it's basically Tinder, but for people who are a little more open-minded.
Yeah. So
that's a really great.
And you can be a couple on there too.
Yeah, you can be couples, but the couples have like individual profiles and then link them.
Yeah.
So it's a little nuanced there. If you're on the west, maybe let's say west of the Mississippi, Cassidy is a really big one, and that's KASIDIE. If you're east of the Mississippi, you've got like Swing Lifestyle.
SDC.
SDC is big if you're like in the southeast, like Florida. Mm-hmm. There's so many of them. There's
Alt Playground, which is on the in the kind of
Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah.
There's Double Date Nation, which is sort of a national one, and they're growing. So there's a whole bunch of them. But yeah, there's also like #Open is an app out there. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different things. I think
because we're such an international community, she might not even be in the States.
Yeah. If I don't know all of the European ones. I know if she's in,
there's Australian.
If she's in Great Britain, it's I'll come back to it. In England or in Australia, it's Red Hot Pie.
Yeah.
And I would just say wherever you are, like Google like swinger dating sites and try a bunch of them, and then be like, just maybe push for like a virtual meet first. I would say, right? Meet in public. If you're gonna go meet somebody, meet somewhere public. Tell friends. Tell a friend. Where you're going, who you're meeting, when you expect to be back, if they don't hear from you, how they can find you. If you can do like share your location on your phone or drop pins, there's a lot of different things you can do to do that.
As far as like online safety, one thing that we like to do is in general, we don't put too many nude fit photos online, but if you do and you want to do that, I would just recommend to question or think about whether you want your face showing. A lot of times, like we've told people, either have your face showing or have nudity, maybe not both.
In the same photo.
In the same photo. It's just kind of a good practice.
Yeah.
And then like Finn said, tell people where you're going and meet in a public place for sure. And don't be afraid to even, we've heard people that will bring a friend on the first date even to meet the person so they're not alone. Don't be afraid to do that if it will make you more comfortable.
And I would actually, maybe one other thing, and I know this doesn't fit today because there's not really clubs happening, but they're actually a really great, safe place to meet people. So we interviewed a couple, I don't know why, I think it's episode 106, but they basically, a lot of the nightclubs, if you're a single woman, you get in free because they try to promote that. And they didn't have a ton of money when they first started, so they were like, well, she's going to go to the club and he's going to stay home because it's free, and they weren't really sure if they wanted to do it. So she went to the swing club by herself, and she said she felt safer there than she had in any bar she'd ever been in her entire life. Wow. And she walked around, she had a fantastic time. She went and talked to one of the hosts right away and said, hey, I'm brand new, I'm a solo female. And they're like, well, let me introduce you to all my friends, and they'll take care of you, they'll watch over you, they'll make sure you're safe. And so they're actually very, very safe, welcoming environments, because if they're not, people aren't going to go back.
Right.
So when you're allowed to go to nightclubs again, I would look for like a sex or swinger club, and then email the host ahead of time and say, hey, I'm a solo female, I'm really interested in this, but I'm a little nervous, what do you recommend? And they will probably say, come in, I'm so-and-so, find me, I'll make sure you're safe.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Another idea popped into my head. So I actually wasn't familiar with this, but there are like entire vacations for swingers that have come up on your virtual meet and greets and on your podcasts.
Yes.
Let's pretend we weren't in COVID. Would that potentially be a good way to dive into it?
As a solo female, or as a couple?
As a solo female.
Yeah.
Are there solo females who go?
I would say
we don't really know, to tell you the truth.
I don't know if it's allowed. I think their clubs tend to be very, the resorts tend to be very like heteronormative.
Okay, got it.
So, but I don't know that for sure. I would say you would have to, if you're like super confident in yourself and you're willing to go spend a couple of days like on vacation by yourself at a sex resort, like, I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, go for it. But I don't know. I don't know if you could make a reservation or not.
Yeah, I don't know either. And the other thing is, like, they are pretty expensive. So you have to kind of you have to go in the mindset that you're going to have fun and enjoy it no matter what happens. And that's what you need to do. Yeah.
I'd go to the free night at the swinger club to make sure.
Yeah.
And before you spend like $3,000 going to a resort.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, final question. So this is about jealousy. Do you think jealousy is natural and innate, or is it largely stemming from how we're raised and cultural conditioning around monogamy?
I think, go ahead.
No, you.
I think it's a normal human emotion. And I think that some people, yes, you may have more jealousy or not based on how you're raised and your life experiences, but ultimately, I think anyone can feel jealous. Yeah. It just, the levels are different.
Yeah. I think some of this too comes back to the whole, if you're having your needs met kind of discussion, which is like, if we're getting what we want or what we need from our partners, it's much easier if they're then getting something else from outside the relationship. But if you're not, like, if Emma really wants to play basketball with me and I won't play basketball with her, and then I'm off playing basketball with this other person, she's going to probably get a little jealous and wish I was playing basketball with her, right? And so it's kind of a boring analogy, but like, I don't know. I think anybody can get jealous. I think there are definitely people who we've interviewed who have said, I just don't get jealous. Like, I want my partner to go and do whatever and have whatever experiences. There's
different levels for everyone, and I think that's the key. And the people that we've interviewed that say they just don't get jealous, maybe they've just never had anything that happened to make them jealous. You don't know; they could be jealous in the future. But in general, yeah, it's. I think anyone can feel jealous. It's pretty normal, and it's an emotion.
And it also doesn't mean you shouldn't explore like if you're like, well, I'm a jealous person, so I shouldn't look into non-monogamy. I would say not. Like you should, because it's good to grow, it's good to learn, it's good to
Yeah.
figure out what's causing that. So I
I have,
wouldn't let that be the thing that scares you away from it.
Right.
I have to pull up, I have this great jealousy processing tool. I'll share it with you guys. But before I do, I was curious, how have you navigated dealing with jealousy in your relationship? Do you have a certain, I don't know, do you have a certain kind of process, or is it just like we talk through it?
Yeah, I
Basically
know
that.
I know it's a boring answer, but yeah, we kind of talk through it. We like, what made you feel? When did it happen?
Yeah.
What was happening? Was there something I did? Was it an internal thing? Like, and then the next time that thing happens, it's like, oh, well, I wasn't jealous at all. And so it's weird too, because sometimes stuff will pop up at the weirdest time when you're not even expecting it. And you're like, huh, I wouldn't have thought that made me jealous, but it did. Or there's something that was like, I really thought that was going to make me jealous, and it didn't. So it's hard to pinpoint it. But
it takes so much vulnerability too, which is another reason I'm just so drawn to it. Like, it takes a lot of vulnerability to approach a partner and just share something that makes you jealous.
Yeah, it does. Because you don't want to hurt your partner's feelings and be vulnerable in that way. Yeah. But you have to tell them.
Yeah, I would say maybe that's one tip there, is if your partner tells you that they were feeling jealous about something, your reaction shouldn't be like, well, I wasn't doing anything. Like, I didn't even do, like, you can't, like, it's not a time to get mad and defensive. It's a time to like
understand
and talk to them and ask what was happening and how you could do better. Right. And
they may not know right away. They may say, I'm feeling this way. I'm not sure why, but I wanted to tell you, and let's continue to talk about it. And I might need some time to process it. That's all okay. But the fact that like you're telling that person that, yes, I'm having these feelings right now, clues them in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Oh shoot, what was I going to say? Feelings. Oh, I was going to ask you about your communication rituals. Do you do like a weekly or a monthly check-in, or do you do more like in the moment processing?
We don't have anything that's like official of a weekly, monthly check-in. We talk a lot.
We go on lots of walks.
We do.
And we just talk. Like, it's not uncommon for us to go on like 2 or 3 like 1 to 2 hour walks together a week.
Yeah.
And we just talk about everything and where are things at. And I will also say that like largely like the last 2 years have been pretty free of non-monogamy, because we were traveling and then COVID, and there was a little bit of time in there where we had some experiences, but I guess we've had enough of like the go to a club or have a one-time experience where those don't typically take a ton of processing for us. We're fairly confident in those. Now, there are times where things have gone bad or things get much deeper, and then it's time to like talk about like, okay, what happened here?
Right.
Yep. So speaking of what happened here, I want to share this awesome processing tool. I heard it first on, what was it? A Poly Weekly podcast.
Yeah.
So it's essentially, it's a tool to get below the jealousy to the fear or the insecurity underneath it. Mm-hmm. And so think of it almost like Mad Libs, where you fill in the blank. So when blank happens, I make it mean blank. My fear is that means I am blank, and that eventually blank will happen. So a specific example would be when my partner dates, has sex with, and emotionally connects with another person, I make it mean blank. My fear is that means blank, and that eventually blank will happen. And I think there's so much value, not just in doing this, journaling or just thinking through it, but then sharing it and talking through it with a partner.
For sure. Yeah. No, that's a great tool.
I love it. Okay, well, our time is almost up. So I wanted to close by giving you an opportunity to share with the group where people can find you, and also like what are the offerings that you think would be interesting or valuable to people who are wanting to learn more about non-monogamy.
Sure. Well, I'll first start where you can find us, and that is, so we host a weekly podcast. You can download it on any podcast player. You can also find us at our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. Honestly, if you just type in normalizing non-monogamy into Google, you should find us pretty easily. And on our website, we have a place where you can contact us. And also we have a podcast tab where you can see all of the show notes from all of our previous guests. And then we also we've been building a community, and I'll let you talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, so one of the things we started doing sort of maybe like in March, April, right after kind of COVID came in, was we started doing virtual meet and greets, and they've kind of become really awesome. And so we do them every month, and they're like they're $10 to join. And we just bring people together in a Zoom room, and then we ask like sort of a question, a thought-provoking question or a fun question. And then we use the breakout rooms, and we put you in a room with like maybe 3-4 other people, and you talk about it for 5 or 6, 7 minutes, and then we bring it back and we scramble the rooms and we do it again. And so we've been doing those, and they've been awesome. We've been really having a great time with them. And we also we made a discount code for anybody listening or anybody in your group, Leah. So when they go to sign up, they can just use your name, Leah, like all caps, and it'll be 50% off. So it'll be $5.
And just to be clear, these are not swinging or polyamorous specific events. They're just meant to be people who are open-minded and wanting to connect with others. So our next virtual meet and greet is actually tomorrow night. It's Friday night. So we start at 10 p.m. Eastern. I know it's a little late, but we wanted to give the West Coasters time to join as well.
Yeah.
So that's our next one. And that's.
So we can have.
I wanted to share about my experience with them since I've done a couple. So I actually have had an amazing experience on both of them. Number one, even if you're not single, it's just a really lovely way to connect with other people. You guys ask fun questions, and you know, it's really a global community. I mean, I was like talking to people in Australia. So just if you are missing social connection, it's great for that. Or if you're interested in like exploring non-monogamy from a dating perspective, I made like nice connections that I'm still in touch with today, just through that as well. So for me, it's been a super positive experience both times. If you're hungering for just community and connection, or if you're like not wanting to do dating apps and wanting to kind of get a better sense of what people are like in a faster amount of time without the swiping and the messaging, I think it's great for that as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the endorsement. And also I would say it's a really great opportunity if somebody's like, I might be interested in this, but it's a little intimidating. Yeah. Like everybody in there is so welcoming that if you were to like get into a room and they're like, I'm brand new to this, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm really nervous, like people are just going to have fun and chat, and like you're all just humans getting to know each other. Like it. Yeah. So there's not going to be someone like, oh, well, you're not polyamorous, what are you doing in here? Like there's none of that. So.
And I just also wanted to mention, if you can't make tomorrow, that's okay. Like we do them monthly. So just be on the lookout on our website for the next one.
Yeah. And I believe, Leah, we sent you the link too, so you can post it right afterward.
Yeah, so I'll create episode notes for this conversation, and I'll slug that in along with some of the other things we discussed.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to tell people about that. We'd love to have some fresh faces.
Yeah, for sure.
And we got a lot of your community coming to that Esther Perel discussion group as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was funny. I was chatting with a guy earlier today who had posted a really insightful question in the group about, well, I won't share just to protect his identity. But he mentioned like, oh yeah, I found the community through your episode on the Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast. I'm like, that's so cool. I'm talking to Em and Finn tonight. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're super happy to be able to collaborate. I think we love building the community around this and having awesome people like you who, again, it's your group isn't non-monogamy specific, but they're fun conversations and they're thought-provoking regardless. So we're always excited to do it.
If Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Emma and Finn. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening on your virtual retreat.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's watching and listening to this as well.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Have a great evening. We'll catch you in the group soon. Bye, everyone.